August 14th, 1867, Union County, South Carolina. Marcus Johnson stood on the church porch, rifle in one hand, Bible in the other, watching 60 torches approach through the darkness. Wait, wrong story. Let me take you somewhere else. Somewhere they really don't want you to know about. September 1906, Atlanta, Georgia. A 72-year-old black man climbs the steps to his pulpit at Big Bethel AME Church. Outside, the city is burning. White mobs are dragging black people from streetcars. They're smashing windows. They're setting fires. The police aren't stopping them. The police are joining them. And inside this church, 200 people are looking at their bishop, waiting to hear what a man of God tells them to do when hell comes to their doorstep. His name is Henry McNeal Turner, and what he says next will get him erased from every church history book for the next 100 years. He opens his mouth. His voice fills the sanctuary. They have torches, he says. Do you have rifles? God gave you hands. Will you use them to pray or to defend? The congregation goes silent. Some are shocked, others are nodding. A few men stand up and walk to the back of the church, where hidden beneath the floorboards, weapons have been stored for exactly this moment. This is not the story they taught you about black church leaders. This is not the peaceful turn the other cheek, wait for white people to give you rights narrative. This is the story they buried, because if you knew that bishops once preached armed self-defense from the pulpit, if you knew that churches were fortresses and sanctuaries and armories, all at once the entire framework of how you understand black resistance would collapse. By the end of this video, you will know why Bishop Henry McNeal Turner called God a Negro and how white churches tried to destroy him for it. You will know how he organized armed defense networks inside AME churches across the South. You will know why his own denomination erased his most radical sermons from their official records. And you will understand how his vision connects directly to reparations, to the wealth gap, to why black churches today feel powerless when they once held so much power. This is not ancient history. This is your history. This affects your life today. If your family went to an AME church, a Baptist church, any black church in the South between 1880 and 1920, they heard Bishop Turner's name. They debated his ideas. They lived in the world he was trying to build. And when that world was destroyed, when his churches were burned and his followers were scattered and his writings were suppressed, your family's wealth, your family's power, your family's options were destroyed, right along with it. Your ancestors weren't just praying and hoping. They were organizing, they were arming, they were building. And somebody spent 100 years making sure you never found out. Let me tell you about the man they erased. February 1st, 1834, Newberry County, South Carolina, Henry McNeal. Turner is born free, not freed, free. His mother, Hannah Greer, raises him alone after his father dies. Being free in South Carolina in 1834 means you're one accident away from slavery, one white man's lie away from chains, one sheriff's decision away from being sold south. But Hannah makes sure her son learns to read. She finds a white lawyer who teaches young Henry in secret, because teaching black children to read is illegal, and the penalty is whipping. By age 14, Turner is working in that lawyer's office. He's learning Latin. He's teaching himself Greek. He's studying Hebrew because he wants to read the Bible in its original languages, not the slave owner's translation. Think about that. A 14-year-old black boy in South Carolina teaching himself ancient languages while slavery is legal and black people are property and reading could get him killed. 1853. Turner is 19. He joins the Methodist Episcopal Church South, the white Methodist Church, because that's the only option. He becomes a traveling preacher. He walks from town to town preaching to whoever will listen, black and white. But the white Methodists won't ordain him. They'll let him preach. They'll let him build their churches. They won't let him be equal. 1854. Turner leaves. He joins the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the AME, the black denomination. Within 4 years, he's ordained a deacon. 2 years after that, he's an elder. And in 1863, right in the middle of the Civil War, he becomes something no black man has been before. He becomes a chaplain in the United States Army. Not just any unit, the first United States colored troops, black soldiers, fighting for their freedom. And Turner is there with them, Bible in hand, rifle nearby, praying with them before battles and burying them after. He sees what these men can do. He sees black soldiers fight harder, die braver, stand taller than anyone ever gave them credit for. And he starts to understand something. Black people don't need white permission to be great. Black people don't need white validation to be powerful. Black people need weapons and land and institutions and the will to use them. The war ends, slavery ends, and suddenly black men can vote. Suddenly black men can run for office. Suddenly the entire South is up for grabs, and whoever organizes fastest will control it. Turner organizes. He builds churches, dozens of them. He ordains ministers, hundreds of them. He registers voters, thousands of them. And in 1868, he gets elected to the Georgia House of Representatives, a black man, a former preacher to colored troops, elected to the legislature of a Confederate state just 3 years after the Confederacy fell. Picture the scene. Turner walks into the Georgia state capitol. He takes his seat. 32 other black men take their seats with him. For the first time in American history, black men are writing the laws. They're debating budgets. They're proposing education funding and land redistribution and civil rights protections. And white Georgia is losing its mind. September 1868. The white legislators call a vote, not on policy, on people. Can black men even serve in this legislature? The Georgia Constitution doesn't explicitly say yes, so white Georgia decides that means no. 83 white men vote yes to expulsion. 23 vote no. And just like that, every single black legislator is thrown out. Not for corruption, not for incompetence, for being black. Turner stands up. He's not leaving quietly. He walks to the center of the chamber, and he delivers a speech that will echo for the next 150 years. I am here to demand my rights, he says, and to hurl thunderbolts at the men who would dare to cross the threshold of my manhood. Thunderbolts, not prayers, not pleas. Thunderbolts. The white legislators vote him out anyway. He gets no salary, no pension, nothing. He served. He was elected, and Georgia throws him away like trash. That's the moment. That's when Turner stops believing the system will fix itself. That's when he stops thinking white America will do the right thing if you just appeal to their conscience. That's when he starts preaching something new, something dangerous, something that will get him erased. But before we get to what he preached, you need to understand what happened next. Because what happened to Turner didn't just happen to him. It happened to his family. It happened in ways that prove this wasn't about politics. This was about terror. 1890s. Turner's son, Henry McNeal Turner Jr., is living in Alabama. He's a farmer. He's staying out of politics. He's just trying to live. But he's got his father's name. And in Alabama, that name means something. It means troublemaker. It means uppity. It means target. One night a mob comes. White men. They drag Turner's son from his home. They accuse him of some crime nobody can ever quite name. And they lynch him. They hang him from a tree. They burn his body. And when it's over, they leave him there as a message to his father. This is what happens when you demand your rights. This is what happens when you hurl thunderbolts. Turner gets the news. His son is dead, murdered, and nobody will investigate. Nobody will prosecute. Nobody will even admit it happened. He writes in his diary, "I used to love the American flag, but now I hate it. My son's blood is on its stars." That's not poetry. That's a father who just buried his child because white America couldn't tolerate a black man with pride. April 23th, 1899. Palmetto, Georgia. A black farmer named Sam Hose gets into an argument with his white employer. The details are disputed. White newspapers will say Jose attacked first. Black witnesses will say the employer pulled a gun. What's not disputed is that the employer dies and Sam Hose runs. They catch him a week later. And what happens next is so brutal, so savage, so demonic, that even saying it out loud feels like violating something sacred. But you need to hear it, because this is what Turner witnessed. This is the world he lived in. This is why he said what he said. 2,000 white people gather, not a mob, an audience. They bring their children, they sell tickets. They turn a lynching into a spectacle. They tie Sam Hose to a tree. While he's still alive, they cut off his ears. They cut off his fingers. They castrate him. They skin parts of his body. And through all of it, he's screaming, he's praying, he's begging. And they're laughing, they're cheering, they're taking photographs. Then they pour kerosene on him and light the fire. And when his body finally stops moving, they cut it into pieces and sell those pieces as souvenirs. Somebody buys his knuckles. Somebody buys a piece of his liver. A white grocer in Atlanta displays Sam Hose's charred knuckles in his store window for a week. Turner hears about this. He's a bishop now. He's 70 years old. He's spent his entire life preaching and building and organizing. And he realizes something that will define the rest of his ministry. White America is not going to save black people. White churches are not going to save black people. The law is not going to save black people. Black people have to save themselves. He goes back to his pulpit, and he starts preaching things that make his own church nervous, things that make white authorities investigate him, things that will get him written out of history. He says to the black people of America, "Get your guns." He doesn't whisper it. He prints it in his newspaper. He preaches it from the pulpit. He tells his congregations that a Winchester rifle should have a place of honor in every black home. He says if you must die, die fighting. God will honor you more than if you die praying. Can you imagine a bishop, a man of God, telling his flock that God honors resistance more than submission? That's not what they taught you in Sunday school. That's not what your pastor says. But that's what Turner preached. And he preached it loud. But he doesn't stop there. Because Turner isn't just thinking about self-defense. He's thinking about escape. He's thinking about building something white America can never destroy, because it won't be in America. 1894. Turner founds the African Emigration Association. His goal is simple and radical. He wants black Americans to leave. Not all of them, but enough. 5 million, he says. Let 5 million Negroes return to Africa and build a black nation so powerful that America will regret what it did to us. White people laugh. Black intellectuals like W.E.B. Du Bois criticize him. They say he's running away. They say he's giving up. They say America is our home and we should fight for it. Turner says you want to fight for a country that lynches your children. You want to build wealth in a place that burns your businesses. Go ahead. I'm telling people there's another option. He raises money, $50,000. In 1890s money, that's over $1.5 million today. He charters ships, the SS Horsa in 1895, the SS Lorada in 1896, and he sends black families to Liberia, to Sierra Leone, to South Africa. 500 people go. They start churches. They start businesses. They build what Turner calls a new Africa for the new Negro. But here's what most people don't know. Turner doesn't just send families. He sends his theology. He sends ministers he personally ordained. And he tells them to preach one specific thing. Tell them God is black. 1898, Mother Bethel AME Church in Philadelphia. Turner is invited to preach. The church is packed, every pew filled, people standing in the aisles. They've heard rumors about what Turner's been saying down south. They want to hear it for themselves. Turner stands at the pulpit. He opens his Bible, and he says something that will get him denounced by 50 denominations, investigated by the police, and erased from church history. We have as much right to believe that God is a Negro, he says, as white people have to believe that God is a white man. The church goes silent. You can hear people breathing. Some folks gasp, some nod. Some look around nervously, like they're waiting for lightning to strike. Turner keeps going. He says, think about it. Genesis says God made man in his image. The first humans were in Africa. The first humans were black. So if God made man in his image, and the first man was black, then God looks like us. Not like them. He's not done. He quotes scripture, Acts 17 verse 26. God made from one man every nation of mankind. One man. In Africa. Black. Therefore God is black. The church erupts. Half the congregation stands and applauds. The other half is stunned into silence. White newspapers the next day call him a heretic. They call him dangerous. They say he's preaching racial hatred. Black newspapers reprint his sermon. It spreads like fire. Within a month, 100 black newspapers across the country have published Turner's words. Black people in Texas are reading it, in Louisiana, in Mississippi, everywhere, and white churches lose their minds. 50 denominations issue statements condemning Turner. The Methodist Episcopal Church South, his old denomination, says he's abandoned Christianity. The Presbyterian Church calls him a false prophet. Even some black ministers distance themselves. They say Turner is too radical, too angry, too dangerous, but Turner doesn't back down. He doubles down. He prints the sermon in his newspaper, Voice of Missions. He preaches it again, and again, and he adds something new. He says if you're going to worship a God who looks like your oppressor, you'll never be free. But if you worship a God who looks like you, you'll remember you're made in his image. You'll remember you're divine. You'll remember you're powerful. That's not just theology. That's a revolution. Now here's where it gets really dangerous. Because Turner isn't just preaching, he's organizing. And what he's organizing will terrify white America more than any sermon ever could. Between 1890 and 1906, Turner builds something unprecedented. He calls them protection leagues. White people will later call them insurrection cells. But to the black congregations across Georgia, South Carolina, and Alabama, there's something simpler. Their survival. Here's how it works. Turner travels from church to church. He's a bishop, so he has access. He can go anywhere in the AME network. And at each church, after the Sunday service ends, after the white visitors leave, after the doors are locked, he holds a second meeting, a private meeting. Men only. He teaches them to shoot. He teaches them to organize watches. He teaches them the code. When you hear the church bells ring 3 times in the middle of the night, that means grab your rifle and come to the church. When you hear someone say prayer meeting tonight, that means a mob is coming and we're preparing to defend. When you see a white cloth hanging from the church window, that means all clear. When you see a red cloth, that means danger, stay armed. And here's the part that will blow your mind. These churches start storing weapons, rifles hidden beneath pulpits, ammunition buried in churchyards, pistols wrapped in oilcloth and stored in the walls. The houses of God become armories, and Turner is the one organizing it. How many people are part of this network? Historians estimate at least 10,000 black men across 3 states. 10,000. Armed. Organized. Waiting. But they're not waiting to attack. They're waiting to defend. And the difference matters. Because when white mobs come, and they come often, they expect what they always get. They expect black people to run. They expect screaming and begging and helplessness. What they don't expect is gunfire coming from a church. 1899, Terrell County, Georgia. A white mob rides toward a small AME Church outside Dawson. They've heard that the minister there has been preaching Turner's messages. They've heard he's been organizing. They're coming to teach a lesson, burn the church, hang the preacher, the usual terrorism. They arrive at midnight, torches lit, 50 men on horseback. They expect to find a dark church, a scared preacher, an easy target. Instead, they find every window of that church glowing with lamplight. And when they get within 100 yards, they hear it, the sound of rifles cocking. 20, 30, maybe 40 distinct clicks echoing in the darkness. A voice calls out from the church, "This is God's house. You are not welcome here. Turn around or meet your maker tonight." The mob stops. They're not used to this. They're used to black people scattering like leaves. They're used to fear. This isn't fear. This is something else. Someone in the mob fires a shot, maybe to scare them, maybe to start the attack. It doesn't matter. Because the church returns fire, not 1 shot, 30 shots. And suddenly white men are diving off horses, scrambling for cover, realizing they rode into something they didn't prepare for. The mob retreats. No church burned that night. No preacher hanged. And the next Sunday, that congregation sings louder than they've ever sung before. Stories like this happen across the South. They don't make the newspapers. White newspapers won't report them because it ruins the narrative. Black newspapers sometimes hint at them, but carefully, because openly celebrating armed resistance gets your newspaper shut down. But the stories spread anyway, whispered in barbershops, shared at family dinners, passed along church networks, and the message is clear. Turner's way works. When you stand your ground, when you're organized, when you're armed, they back down. But Turner knows something else. He knows you can't just defend, you have to build. And you can't build in a country that burns everything you create. So he keeps pushing his Africa plan, and he adds something new to it. He starts talking about reparations. 1900. Turner publishes an editorial in Voice of Missions. The headline is, "What America Owes the Negro." And in it, he does something nobody has done before. He calculates. He says 4 million enslaved people were freed in 1865. Each one was promised 40 acres and a mule. That's a documented promise. Sherman's Field Order Number 15, signed, official, then revoked by President Andrew Johnson. So right there, that's 160 million acres that were promised and stolen. 160 million acres. That's the entire land area of Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi combined. But Turner doesn't stop there. He says, let's talk about labor. 250 years of unpaid labor. Millions of people working from sunrise to sunset, building the wealth of this nation and receiving nothing. How much is that worth? He estimates conservatively $100 per person per year of slavery. Do the math. 4 million people times 250 years times $100. That's $100 billion. In 1900, money. Adjust for inflation and interest, and you're talking about trillions today. And then he says the part that gets him investigated by the federal government. He says America will pay. If not now, then your children will pay our children. If not in money, then in blood. The debt compounds. The bill comes due. And the longer America waits, the more expensive justice becomes. White politicians call this extortion. Black intellectuals call it unrealistic. Turner calls it math. He preaches this from the pulpit. Every Negro in America is owed. Not asking, not begging. Owed. You don't ask for what you're owed. You demand it. And if they refuse to pay you, take it. You build it. You create it. And if they try to destroy what you create, you defend it. With lawyers if possible. With rifles if necessary. Can you imagine a bishop preaching this in 1900? Can you imagine how terrifying this is to white power structures? Because Turner isn't some street radical. He's not some angry young man who can be dismissed. He's a bishop. He's educated. He speaks Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. He's been elected to public office. He has credentials they can't challenge. And he's telling black people they're owed, and they have the right to collect by any means necessary. The federal government opens an investigation. They want to charge him with inciting insurrection. They send agents to his churches. They intercept his mail. They interview his congregants. They're looking for anything they can use to arrest him. But Turner is careful. He never explicitly calls for violence. He calls for self-defense. He never explicitly calls for revolution. He calls for justice. And in America in 1900, you can't arrest a man for demanding what's legally owed. So they try something else. They pressure the AME Church. They tell the bishops control Turner or lose your tax-exempt status. They tell them silence him or we'll investigate every church you have. They threaten. They intimidate. And slowly, quietly, the AME Church starts to distance itself from its most powerful voice. 1902, the AME Church holds its general conference. Turner is there. He's been a bishop for over 20 years. He's built more churches than anyone. He's ordained more ministers than anyone. He's raised more money than anyone. But the younger bishops are nervous. They're tired of the controversy. They're tired of the federal investigations. They're tired of white newspapers calling the AME Church a radical organization. They pass a resolution. The views expressed by Bishop Turner are his own personal views and do not represent the official position of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. They make him clarify in writing that when he talks about armed self-defense, he's speaking as an individual, not as a church leader. It's a betrayal. But it's a calculated one. The AME Church needs to survive. And if Turner's radicalism threatens that survival, then Turner has to be contained. Turner accepts the resolution. He signs the clarification. But he doesn't stop preaching. He just gets more careful about where and how he says things. And he shifts his focus. If the AME Church won't officially support armed resistance, fine. He'll build the resistance unofficially, through personal networks, through loyal ministers, through congregations that trust him more than they trust the denominational leadership. And then comes 1906, and everything Turner has been warning about, everything he's been preparing for, happens in one terrible week. September 22nd, 1906, Atlanta, Georgia. Newspapers have been running stories for days, fake stories, fabricated stories about black men assaulting white women. 4 alleged assaults in 1 week, none of them confirmed, none of them investigated, none of them real. But the newspapers print them anyway. They print them in bold headlines. They print them with inflammatory language. And they print them knowing exactly what will happen. White Atlanta explodes. Thousands of white men pour into the streets. They're not looking for specific suspects. They're looking for any black person. They drag black people off streetcars. They beat them in the streets. They shoot them in their homes. They set fire to black businesses. And the police do nothing. Some police officers join the mob. The violence spreads across the city. Brownsville, Darktown, Mechanicsville. Any neighborhood with black residents becomes a target. And the black people of Atlanta realize nobody is coming to save them. Not the police, not the government, not white allies, nobody. So they remember what Turner taught them. They go to the churches, Big Bethel AME, Wheat Street Baptist, Ebenezer Baptist, and they arm themselves. At Big Bethel Turner's church, the deacons pull up the floorboards. They pull out the rifles Turner made sure were there. They station men at every window. They lock the doors, and they wait. If the mob wants this church, they'll have to pay for it in blood. The mob comes, 200 white men with torches and guns. They surround Big Bethel. They shout, they threaten, they fire shots into the air. And then one of them tries to force open the front door. A single shot rings out from inside the church. The man at the door falls. He's hit in the shoulder, not killed, but wounded. And suddenly the mob realizes this church isn't defenseless. Suddenly they're not facing helpless victims. They're facing men who will fight back. The mob hesitates. More shots come from the church. Not a barrage. Controlled fire. Warning shots. Message shots. We are not running. We are not hiding. We are not your victims. The police arrive. But they don't arrest the mob. They surround the church. They demand the black men inside disarm and surrender. The deacons refuse. They say you let the mob burn our neighborhoods, and now you want us to give up our guns. No. You want our weapons, come take them. Standoff. For hours. The mob outside. Armed black men inside. Police in between. And somewhere in that church, Bishop Henry McNeal Turner, 72 years old, sitting in a pew, probably praying. Probably proud. Probably thinking, this is what I prepared them for. This is why we hid the rifles. This is why we trained. This is why we organized. Eventually, the mob disperses. The sun comes up, the police leave, and Big Bethel, AME Church, stands, unburned, unconquered. Because the men inside remembered what their bishop taught them. God gave you hands. Use them. But not everyone survives the Atlanta riots. Over 3 days, 25 black people are killed. Some estimates say 100. Nobody knows for sure because white authorities don't count black bodies. Hundreds more are injured. Black businesses are destroyed. Black families flee the city. And when it's over, when the violence finally stops, white Atlanta declares victory. They successfully terrorized the black community. They put them back in their place. Except they didn't. Because the black people who defended those churches remember. They remember they stood their ground and survived. They remember the mob backed down when faced with armed resistance. And they pass that memory down. To their children. To their grandchildren. To you. Turner looks at what happened in Atlanta, and he doesn't see defeat. He sees confirmation. Everything I told you was true. He preaches the next Sunday. They will not give you justice. They will not protect you. They will kill you if you let them. But if you stand together, if you're armed, if you're organized, you can survive. You can resist. You can win. White newspapers demand Turner be arrested. They say he incited the riots with his preaching. Federal agents investigate again. Georgia politicians call for his removal from the state. But they can't touch him. Because Turner didn't start the riots. White newspapers did. White mobs did. All Turner did was tell black people to defend themselves. And you can't arrest a man for that. Not legally, anyway. But the AME Church can silence him. And that's exactly what they do. In 1907, the church leadership makes a decision. They assign Turner to foreign missions, Africa. They say it's an honor. They say he's the perfect person to oversee the churches he helped establish in Liberia and South Africa. But everyone knows what it really is. It's exile. They're removing him from the American South, where he's dangerous. They're sending him to Africa, where he can't organize armed resistance, where he can't preach revolution, Where he can't threaten the stability of the denomination, Turner goes. He doesn't fight it. He's 73 years old. He's tired. He's spent 50 years fighting and building and organizing. Maybe Africa is where he belongs. Maybe this is God's plan. Maybe his work in America is done, and now he's supposed to plant seeds in Africa that will grow into something even bigger. He spends 2 years in Africa. He ordains ministers. He builds churches. He preaches his God is a Negro theology to Africans who have never heard a black bishop say such things. And he tells them, you are not inferior to white missionaries. You are not second-class Christians. You are the original image of God. Build your churches. Build your nations. And never ever let them convince you that white is better. 1910. Turner returns to America, but he's not the same man who left. He's older, weaker. His health is failing, and the AME Church has changed in his absence. Younger bishops have taken control. They're more cautious, more accommodating, more concerned with respectability than resistance. They look at Turner and they see a relic, a radical from another era who doesn't understand that progress requires compromise. Turner looks at them and sees betrayal. He sees men who would rather be accepted by white society than fight for black liberation. He sees the church he helped build becoming something he doesn't recognize. But he's too old and too sick to fight them. So he keeps preaching. Smaller churches now, fewer invitations, but he keeps preaching his message. Get your guns. Demand reparations. God is black. Build institutions. Resist oppression. May 8, 1915. Turner dies in Windsor, Canada, while traveling for a speaking engagement. He's 81 years old. He's outlived most of his critics. He's outlived 2 wives. He's outlived several of his children. And he dies believing he failed. He dies believing his message didn't take root. He dies believing black people will never get the reparations they're owed, will never build the African nation he envisioned, will never embrace the armed resistance he preached. He's wrong, but he'll never know it. Because what Turner doesn't see is that his seeds are planted. His theology will influence Marcus Garvey. His armed resistance philosophy will inspire the Deacons for Defense in the 1960s. His God is black message will become black liberation theology. His reparations calculations will become the foundation for modern reparations movements. Everything he preached, everything he built, everything he organized will echo through the next century. But first, they have to erase him. And that's exactly what happens next. Turner's funeral is massive. 10,000 people attend. Black people travel from across the country to pay respects. They fill Mother Bethel AME Church in Philadelphia. They overflow into the streets. They remember him as a giant, a prophet, a warrior bishop who never backed down. But within 5 years, the official AME Church histories start changing. The biographies of Turner start getting edited. The parts about armed resistance removed. The God is a Negro sermons summarized as theological eccentricity. The reparations demands described as unrealistic idealism. The Protection Leagues never mentioned. By 1920, you can read an official AME Church history book and learn that Henry McNeal Turner was a missionary to Africa and a civil rights pioneer who advocated emigration. That's it. Nothing about the rifles, nothing about the revolutionary theology, nothing about the federal investigations or the armed standoffs, or the direct confrontation with white supremacy. It's not accidental, it's systematic. And here's how they did it. First, they destroyed the physical evidence. Turner had a personal library, over 1,500 books, rare manuscripts, his personal journals covering 40 years of ministry. After he dies, his family tries to preserve them. They contact the AME Church. They offer to donate everything to the church archives. The church says yes. They'll send someone to collect the materials. Nobody comes. The family waits. Years pass. Some of Turner's books get sold at auction to pay debts. Others are given to relatives. Many just disappear. By 1920, Turner's personal papers are scattered. His journals are fragmented. Only pieces survive. And those pieces happen to be the least controversial parts. The sermons on salvation. The letters about church administration. The boring stuff. The dangerous stuff gone. Second, they purged the archives. The AME Church keeps records, sermons, conference minutes, bishop reports. And in the 1920s and 1930s, somebody goes through those archives and makes decisions. This sermon by Turner, keep it. This one about armed self-defense, lost. This letter about organizing protection leagues, missing. This editorial about reparations, can't find it. It's not that the entire archive burns. It's that specific documents vanish. The ones that would prove Turner preached armed resistance. The ones that would connect him to organized networks of armed black men. The ones that would make modern AME members ask uncomfortable questions about why their church became so passive. Third, they renamed things. Churches that were called Turner Memorial or Turner Chapel, renamed. Streets that were named after him. His name stays, but the historical markers that explain who he was, they focus on his education work, his missionary work, his legislative service. Nothing about why he was controversial. Nothing about what made him dangerous. Fourth, they changed the seminary curriculum. In 1910, if you went to an AME seminary, you studied Turner extensively, his theology, his writings, his strategies. By 1940, Turner gets maybe one chapter. By 1960, he's a footnote. Students learn about Richard Allen, the founder of the AME Church. They learn about Daniel Payne, the educator bishop. They learn about other safe, respectable, non-threatening figures. Turner briefly mentioned as an emigrationist who had some extreme views. That's it. And fifth, they let white historians control the narrative. When academic historians in the 1920s and 1930s start writing about black church history, they interview AME leaders. And those leaders describe Turner very carefully. Yes, he was significant. Yes, he built many churches. Yes, he had some controversial ideas. But he was more bark than bite, more rhetoric than action. An interesting character, but not someone whose ideas should be taken seriously. So when the history books get written, Turner becomes a minor figure, an oddity, a radical who was out of step with the real leaders of the black church. And that narrative solidifies. It gets repeated in textbook after textbook. Turner becomes the bishop who wanted black people to go back to Africa, end of story. But here's what they couldn't erase. The people who heard him preach, the families who were part of his networks, the congregations that defended their churches because he taught them how. Those people remembered, and they told their children, and their children told their children. The story survived underground, in oral histories, in family Bibles with handwritten notes, in whispered conversations about what really happened in Atlanta in 1906. And now you know. You know that Bishop Henry McNeal Turner wasn't just some back to Africa dreamer. He was a revolutionary who understood that black liberation required arms organization, economic power, and theological transformation. He was a prophet who warned that without reparations, without justice, without power, black people would still be fighting the same battles 100 years later. And he was right. Look around. What has changed?